We're going to continue monitoring this because they're obviously talking about this new Mexico, Canada, United States agreement. We're going to be flipping back when they have a chance to address this tiff that the Canadians have with the Chinese now with the apprehension of this millionaire Canadian entrepreneur and a former trade diplomat. So they haven't gotten to that, how this might affect the ongoing Chinese trade talks, which are working on a separate level from the separate agreement we had with Canada and Mexico. But again, Canada was a late signer to that agreement, which is why the Mexicans are not at this particular session. But there are a lot of things that were signed into that call for obligations out of the Canadians not to favor the China, to walk away and do agreements with China. Not that they have to worry about that, because tensions are such between those two countries over the arrest of the CFO of this Huawei telephone concern. She is the daughter, by the way, of the founder of the company. That she will not be allowed to leave Canada, and that is causing a big consternation in China. So we'll get to that. It's a little involved here, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but I'm back with my panel. I interrupted my friend Brett Arends here from MarketWatch. Brett, you were talking about, how much of this is drama, how much of this is real. When it comes to the Chinese, you could say pretty much about any commitment they make. So leaving aside the slowdown, and it's not an insignificant development, or apprehending diplomats and millionaire businessmen and all the like, what are we dealing with here? And how closely should we police everything they sign off on, assuming we got a deal?
Oh, well, of course, look, we're trading. We're dealing with a country that is, first of all, run by a totalitarian dictatorship, and second of all, has a very a sort of cultural view of the world in which China basically is not just number one in the sense that every country thinks it's number one, but actually is China first and everybody else is sort of gray matter. So look, the Chinese are going to ruthlessly pursue their own interests, dishonestly or honestly, and always will. I don't think, or always will, certainly under the current regime, I don't think you can put an enormous amount of faith in the good offices of the Chinese. What I would say is I think it's very important for people following the markets and people in business to separate out headline risk and fundamental risk. I think there are enormous headline risks involved in trade spats, in arrests, and all these things which are drama, which can drive the Dow down 500 points or 1,000 points or up, not least because short sellers and speculators will bet on other people's instant reactions. It's very important to separate those from fundamental risks about things that may actually cause recessions, may fundamentally harm. We are not talking about the kind of trade wars that we all learned about in high school from the 1930s, Smoot-Hawley and all the rest of it. None of this, what we're talking about at the moment, in terms of tariffs and disagreements, comes remotely close to the kind of stuff that helped prolong the Great Depression in the 30s. So the fundamental risks are very different from the headline risks.
All right, we hope you're right about that. By the way, as you were speaking here, and I want to bounce this off you, Hadley, Reuters is reporting that the former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has taken himself out of the running to be the president's next chief of staff, saying the timing is not right for himself or his family. And this is now coming up in a variety of media outlets, the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera. So that was a short-lived dalliance. But why is this so difficult now? Why is finding a chief of staff such a Herculean task? And I'm wondering, too, what you think the fallout will be from that wait.
Oh, I think the chief of staff is a particularly difficult role to fill. This is a position where you're in charge of a lot of the matters that the White House has to respond to. But I would say particularly right now, the chief of staff position is going to be something that, in terms of the conversation we're having more broadly about trade, implementing the White House's agenda here and explaining it to the rest of the country. President Trump, we heard some officials talking about the new NAFTA deal, the USMCA, and how basically this is an improvement, a modernization, but not leaps and bounds different from the older version of NAFTA. I think if President Trump can come somewhere close to that with a trade deal with China, it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be the perfect deal. And certainly with China, I'd say we do maybe a little less trust and a little more verify. But if he can come up with a plan like that has better enforcement and better protections for American IP, it just baby steps in the right direction, then he can claim a political win, which is something that his White House needs.
You know, I'm sure eventually, Gary, they're going to get a chief of staff. For all I know, your phone will start ringing. But I am curious what you make of this global slowdown, Doug, because whether you're looking at oil, you're looking at these countries reporting some anemic economic numbers, it does make you wonder. It doesn't seem to be happening in this country, but it certainly seems to be happening in lots of countries with whom we do lots of business. What do you think?
I think it's happening in this country, too. It wasn't but, I think a few weeks ago, you and I were chatting, and they had just announced the GM closure. You know, I look back then and I think, my gosh, is their forecasting so bad that they didn't anticipate that these cars weren't going to be selling? I think there's something deeper there. I'm seeing it in Wall Street Journal had an article about the housing prices now on the decline in places like Las Vegas. There's just, you know, whatever is the opposite of the green sprouts, I'm seeing it here a little bit, and I'm seeing it obviously overseas. You know, Europe's in turmoil. China, although they are growing, the growth there is slowing. You know, I'm not going to say there's going to be a recession imminent in 2019, but I'd have to say I'm at best neutral on the world's economies right now.
All right, guys, I want to thank you all very, very much. We're trying